Should the Baltimore Ravens sign Jason Pierre-Paul? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online is who covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. And we're back here with another week of Ravens talk, and we are at mandatory minicamp, or the mandatory minicamp stage of the offseason. Minicamp running from June 14th to June 16th, which is Tuesday through Thursday. A bunch of big storylines to dive into in terms of just what minicamp could hold. So we'll end up talking about that in the final segment. Players to watch, looking for any other storylines that we can come up with here in the final segment. In the first segment, I was thinking a little bit, and I was kind of talking to a couple of people about just what the roles of these rookies could be on the Ravens. And it kind of sparked my interest a little bit. And I kind of want to just think about that today in the first segment. So talking about roles for Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum and just where they could play snap count wise, starters, bench. You know, there's not really like a bench quote unquote type thing for some of these guys where they're still going to be playing a decent amount of snaps just without the starter label. So we'll talk about those rookies in the first segment. But in the second segment, I want to dive a bit more into the Jason Pierre-Paul visit and talk about if the Ravens should sign him. He's a quality pass rusher, but is he a fit for this Ravens defense and what they do? And would potentially Justin Houston be the better one? So we'll talk about that in the second segment. So much to talk about here today. If you are here with us, though, on YouTube in video form, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're growing fast here on YouTube. It's been amazing to watch. Thank you to everybody who has supported me here and subscribed to this channel. And if you're thinking about it, you're wondering why we do put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week. And it's really, if you want that opinion, the analysis, anything coming about the Baltimore Ravens, we have it here for you in video form. But we also have it for you in audio form. Same show, both video and audio. It's 5 days a week, both platforms. So if you're following along with us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcast, thank you for tuning in audio form. Also, be sure to follow us anywhere you get your podcasts, and be sure to turn notifications on. And be sure to follow me as well on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive in now to some rookie roles. And I know we've had this conversation before. We're also going to continue to have this conversation throughout the rest of the offseason. But just where could these guys play? How often will they play? I'll go down the entire list and just kind of spew off my thoughts here about each of them. So Kyle Hamilton's a player that I think absolutely should be playing a very high amount of snaps early on. And sometimes with the Ravens, we see them favor veterans over rookies, I'd say, in terms of just favoring the experience and favoring the veteran leadership sometimes. But Hamilton is a player, and I don't think this would happen with Hamilton in the first place, but I think that with the talent that Hamilton has, and obviously this could change depending on what happens with Chuck Clark. Right now, I'm assuming Chuck Clark stays just because he's on the roster at this point. So that's what I'm basing this off of, how the roster looks today as I'm talking about this. But even if Kyle Hamilton isn't labeled as a starter, right? If Marcus Williams and Chuck Clark get the quote-unquote starter labels, that doesn't mean Kyle Hamilton is playing 10% of snaps. And I know I've said that a lot, but there truly is a way, especially with how little the Ravens play base defense, or how, they don't play it a ton. I think that for Baltimore, they can use three safeties in so many different ways. I'm so excited to kind of think about how Kyle Hamilton, you can use him as a rangy guy. You can use him up in the box as a physical run stuffer, tone setter type guy. He can play so many different roles on a defense. He showed that at Notre Dame. And the fact that he fell to 14 is just unbelievable. And the fact that the Ravens took him shows that they believe in that talent, because they easily could have gone with another position that was more of a need, right? Safety wasn't the biggest need on the roster because they'd already signed Marcus Williams, brought back Tony Jefferson. They had Geno Stone there, and obviously Chuck Clark as well, and a couple other guys who can play it, like Brandon Stevens and Armour-Davis Washington. But the Ravens saw that talent like a lot of people did. They took him, and I think it was the right pick. So I think Hamilton will have a big role from the jump, as I know a lot of people do. but I'm very excited to see him play. Tyler Linderbaum, the Ravens' other first round selection. I'd be pretty surprised if he wasn't the starter. I mean, when you spend a pick that high on a center, it's not ideal if he's not starting. Now, obviously, if he needs development time, you're not going to start him, right? You want to put the best player out there, even if it's not the first round pick you just spent that first round pick on. So if Patrick McCary needs to step in there, then he can step in there. And the Ravens can feel confident in that with their offensive line depth now, which I personally feel a lot more confident in than I did last season. But I think Linderbaum's a player that I know a lot of people knock his size and in the arm length and everything, but he's picking up the offense, it seems like, throughout rookie minicamp and throughout OTAs and now heading into mandatory minicamp. I think just every rep that he gets is so important. And obviously, just developing the rapport with his fellow offensive linemen, with Lamar Jackson, that's all going to be very important. So I think Linderbaum will start week 1. That's my prediction. And obviously it's not set in stone right now, but that's where I would lean in terms of Linderbaum. Looking at David Ojabo, again, so hard to predict with the Achilles injury. We've talked about it and just the uncertainty that comes with it. We've seen Cam Akers, the Los Angeles Rams running back, recover very quickly and come back for the playoffs after tearing it. I believe it was in June or July, one of the summer months. He came back for the playoffs. So Achilles injuries, guys can come back from them decently fast. But again, every player is different, and you just never know. And Ojabo tore his Achilles in March during his pro day. So it's not like Tyus Bowser, who tore it 2 months earlier, and you're still wondering with Bowser, will he be ready for the start of the season? Is this more of a midseason thing, or could he even miss the entire 2022 season? So with Ojabo, when he's on the field, I think he's going to get reps. Now, he still has a bit of development to do, started playing football a bit later compared to some of his draft counterparts. And again, we've seen that same path with Odafe Oweh, who had a great rookie season for the Ravens, started off very strong, kind of tapered off a little bit in the middle, but then had that very strong end to the year besides the injury where he missed the last couple of games. So I think that for the Ravens, Ojabo could be used in a multitude of different ways. But again, we just have to see with the injury. Travis Jones, I think, will have a role. I think he will have a role. Now, the Ravens, I think they could initially, kind of like I was talking about, they could initially favor the veterans early on in the year. Maybe the first couple of weeks we don't see as much Travis Jones because the Ravens want to give just Madubuike some run. Maybe Roderick Washington. But I think we all know how good of a player Travis Jones is. And the fact that he was available at 76 was unbelievable. And the fact that he can win off the line, he has very strong hands, and also can hold his own in the run game too. I mean, he's a very solid all-around player, but the Ravens haven't been able to generate a ton of interior pressure over the last couple of seasons. So if they start to struggle in that area again, I think that they could use Travis Jones as a third down pass rusher and kind of ease him into a role. But I think by the end of the year, he will have a decently sized role. But that room is so deep right now. Obviously, we're still waiting to kind of figure out what's to do with Derek Wolfe. And we'll probably figure out something, it feels like, for mandatory minicamp. But for Jones, I think he will have a decently big role overall. Then you're looking at Daniel Falele, who I think is just, again, very talented, a bit raw in some areas too. I wouldn't expect him to start week 1. In fact, unless a ton of injuries happen, I wouldn't really expect him to start at all. Maybe he'll get a couple snaps here and there. But the Ravens, they have upped their tackle depth to a level that I think is phenomenal. Obviously, you're hoping for the health of Ronnie Stanley. And when everybody's fully healthy, you have Stanley on the left side, Morgan Moses, it feels like, on the right side, although he will be competing with Falele and also Jawan James. But that's the thing, right? They have Moses and Jawan James and Daniel Falele, and Patrick McCary can swing out there too. If you need him to, Tyree Phillips can, but I personally would keep him at guard. But I think Falele, this is more of a developmental year for him. I wouldn't expect him to get a ton of snaps unless he really impresses and then he proves me wrong. And you know what? I hope that he does and really comes on very strong. But at the same time, again, the Ravens favor that veteran presence. And I think Moses for now is my prediction to be that starter. But Falele, again, with injuries could start, but I hope there are no injuries, obviously. Then moving on to Jalen Armour-Davis, he could have a decently big role too. I mean, the Ravens did bring in Kyle Fuller. I think that lessens the need for Armour-Davis to play a bigger role early on because there were a lot of question marks. Who's behind Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters? But again, it does depend on the health of Peters. I think Marlon Humphrey's good to go at this point. But for Peters, when will he be able to come back from that ACL injury? If he's not able to return week 1, then you're looking at a group, and depending on when Brandon Stevens plays or Darius Washington, you're looking at Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Fuller. And then maybe it is Brandon Stevens, then Jalen Armour-Davis. And that is the state of the room right now without a Marcus Peters healthy. Now, I'm hoping Peters does come back healthy. And if that is the case, then Armour-Davis could, play special teams and do all that and maybe have a bit of a role. But again, it could be more of a developmental year for him if injuries do allow that. And there are no injuries at that position for the Ravens. Then you're moving on and you're talking about Charlie Kohler, who I think, yeah, he'll have a role. I think that, well, I know that obviously Mark Andrews and Nick Boyle are the 1-2, but I think the Ravens do want to get back to bully ball. We have seen that with their personnel decisions. And overall, Kohler is a player who has been likened to Mark Andrews by some. I think he could have a decently big role. Jordan Stout, he's going to be the starter on this team, replacing Sam Cook. He's working with Cook, and I have confidence in Stout. Isaiah Likely's an interesting one. Where are you going to line him up? Are you lining him up at wide receiver? Are you lining him up at tight end? Where are you using him? But this is a situation just like we've talked about before with the cornerback room for the Ravens. It's a position of strength where you can rest guys, you can put guys in different situations, you can confuse defenses. And so I like Likely in a lot of different spots on this offense, but it's a matter of how the Ravens can figure out utilizing him. That's going to be the big key there. Then moving on, I think now the Ravens, it's about Marian Williams, and for him, there's a lot to like about Marian Williams. Where is he going to play? In the slot, on the outside, safety. I imagine him as a slot cornerback, in my opinion, and I think that's where the Ravens are going to play him, honestly. But I think that he's a player that, again, if Brandon Stevens plays slot, if Ardarius Washington plays slot, maybe this is more of a developmental / special teams year for him, where maybe if injuries happen, he can see the field a lot. But again, I'm hoping for no injuries. But again, he's a player that I think is very, very talented. And then finally, Tyler Beatty. We've gone through all of them here. Tyler Beatty is a player that I think is in the lead for the number 3 running back position, in my opinion. He's a player that is very versatile in terms of being able to run hard as well as catch the ball out of the backfield. And I think the Ravens are going to utilize that aspect, catching the football out of the backfield with their running backs, a lot more in 2022, because we saw hints of it in 2021 before Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins went down. So those 11 Ravens draft picks, 6 of them in the 4th round, they have a lot of guys that I think can make immediate contributions. Some guys might not have a clear path to playing time, but again, these are all talented players. I think whether it's this year or down the line, a lot of them will make contributions to this team. But we'll head into our first break here on Locked On Ravens. Still a ton to talk about. When we get back, we'll be diving into if the Ravens should sign Jason Pierre-Paul. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Blue Nile. And whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has simple online tools that you choose a diamond's shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style, and Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind. If you're looking for fine jewelry but are having trouble choosing, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7. They're available from phone or even chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, chips-free, and arrives in discreet packaging. We won't give away what's inside, so shop stress-free and find your forever peace. Go to BlueNile.com today. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And we're going to talk about Jason Pierre-Paul, the pass rusher that visited the Ravens last week. Nothing has been materialized as of this recording, but who knows? Maybe by the time you're listening, something will have materialized. But we're going to talk now about if the Ravens should sign him. And honestly, he's a player that's an interesting one. He's been very accomplished at the NFL level, has played a total of 12 years, 8 with the Giants. He also played 4 with the Buccaneers. And in those 12 seasons, he's totaled 603 tackles. He has 91.5 sacks. So doing some quick math there, he needs 8.5 to get to that 100 milestone. He's also a player that's forced 21 fumbles, has 10 fumble recoveries, even has 4 interceptions, including 2 of those coming in 2020, his last Pro Bowl season with the Buccaneers, where he ended up also notching 9.5 sacks. But 2021 was not a great year for him. He was hindered by an injury, a shoulder injury, and he missed 5 games, only playing in 12, only notched 2.5 sacks. And ended up undergoing some shoulder surgery this offseason. So his availability for camp is a bit questionable at this point based off of what I've read. So we'll see what his injury situation is like. But when healthy, I think he is still a very good player. But does he fit the mold of what the Ravens need right now? I said last week, and I've said it for the past couple months now, that the Ravens do need some more at the outside linebacker pass rushing position. Now, with the addition of David Ojabo to go along with Tyus Bowser, you have 2 players who are question marks in terms of their injury status. Both are very talented, but when is that talent going to get on the field? You just don't know. And even before the pick of Ojabo, right, I was still thinking, they could probably use a veteran guy at the outside linebacker position or just a pass rusher in general. Because right now what they're working with Bowser and Ajabo, let's just put them out of the equation for a second. They're working with Odafe Owe, who's very talented, but going into his second year. Dalen Hayes going into his second year, but ended up being hurt for a lot of his rookie season and showed flashes, but again, wasn't really on the field a ton. Jalen Ferguson, who has not shown a lot. This is good. Now him going into his fourth NFL season. Vince Beagle, who signed a couple of weeks ago. And I think that's everybody in terms of who could be key contributors. So when looking at what the Ravens could add there, I think a veteran is very necessary at this point. Now, I think it is going to come down to, I feel like Justin Houston's going to be in that conversation regardless. And also, you could put Malik Harrison in the conversation for outside linebackers because John Harbaugh said he was cross-training at Sam. But regardless, I still think a veteran is a needed thing for them there. And I talked about this a bit last week, where Justin Houston last year did not play poorly for the Ravens. He was good for them. And I know a lot of people look to the sack numbers and they say, well, his sack numbers weren't nearly what they were in Indianapolis or even in Kansas City. And that is true. But the Ravens did struggle with sacks. They have, at least over the past 4 seasons, that they haven't been a necessarily consistent sack team. They will have games of like 7 sacks, and then they will have 3 straight weeks of 1 or none or 2. So for Houston, he was also very close to notching like 5 more than he actually had. He was like a fingernail away, something we saw with Yannick Ngakoue when he was with the team. So I think that Houston also provided that veteran leadership that the Ravens love and they covet. Odafe Owe and all the guys, calling him Yoda. I think that was it's very fitting because he does have so much NFL knowledge. But Jason Pierre-Paul is a bit bigger than Justin Houston in terms of just actual size. I mean, Pierre-Paul is a 6'5", 275-pound guy, and he ended up playing a lot of defensive end during his time with the Giants, but when he moved over to the Buccaneers in 2019, ended up switching over to linebacker and outside linebacker, and he did stand up there, so he has that positional versatility where if the Ravens did want to move him inside, they could, but they can use him as that stand-up pass rusher if they feel like he's a better fit there. And at this point, I don't feel like the Ravens need more inside guys. I feel like they're pretty set. Maybe if Derek Wolfe ends up being traded or released or whatever happens there, if that does happen, then maybe you could look to the signing of Pierre-Paul and saying, yeah, look, they can use him both on the inside and on the outside, and that's that versatility that they need because Pierre-Paul does have a very big body and he's a big guy. Houston, though, is a player that, I was pounding the table for like 2 years. For 2 years, I was pounding the table for Justin Houston. He finally comes to Baltimore, has a good season. What's the likelihood they sign both? I know Kaji Ismail and I talked about this a bit on Friday. I think it's certainly possible, but I think when you look at it, they could sign both. It's more of a situation of do they trust Jalen Ferguson or not? Because I think if the Ravens sign both and obviously intend on having them both make the roster, I think when looking at, again, let's push Tyus Bowser and David Ajabo aside for a second just because of their injury status. If the Ravens keep, let's say, 5 outside linebackers, if the Ravens sign Jason Pierre-Paul and Justin Houston, those 5, you could look at it and say, okay, Odafe Owe and Dalen Hayes and Jason Pierre-Paul and Jalen Ferguson and Justin Houston, those are your 5 guys. And then, I don't know, maybe Tyus Bowser and David Ajabo start the year on the PUP list. But then what happens when Tyus Bowser comes back? Or if Tyus Bowser comes back? Or if David Ajabo comes back? If the Ravens want to stay with 5 outside linebackers, who's the odd man out there? I think that it would be Jalen Ferguson, unless he obviously has a breakout year, which I'm hoping he does. I'm rooting for Jalen Ferguson. But if Jalen Ferguson is still kind of struggling, not making a huge impact, then I think at that point, if Tyus Bowser comes back, if David Ajabo comes back off the PUP list, at that point, if the Ravens want to keep 5 outside linebackers still, could be a 1-for-1 of Bowser for Ferguson or Ajabo for Ferguson. And in this scenario, Vince Beagle isn't making the roster, who I know could be a very high impact player just in terms of the snaps he would get. I don't think he'd play a very big role on the defense unless injuries again made that happen. But he's versatile, can play inside and outside. So the Ravens have a lot of depth at a lot of positions, right? And if they signed 2 outside linebackers, I don't know. You'd have to make it work financially too. Like, could the Ravens afford to sign both Justin Houston, who, let's say he signs his tender and that whole thing goes through? I think that number is $2.5 million plus the signing of Pierre-Paul. Plus they want to take money into the year, obviously, I feel like, because they usually like doing that just in case there is another guy who's a cap casualty who could be a fit, or if they want to make a trade, or if there's money for injuries and replacing those guys injured. So that they would have to make that work money-wise, which is why I think it would have to come down to they really just don't know about Jalen Ferguson, but that's up to that organization, right? It's up to the Ravens to figure out what their trust level is with a couple of very quality pass rushing options on the market, who apparently, according to Josina Anderson of USA Today, the Pierre-Paul visit went very well. And so, again, we'll see if anything happens. Do I think the Ravens should sign Jason Pierre-Paul? I mean, sure, if it's for a 1-year deal, very, very cheap money, and Justin Houston is either going elsewhere or it just doesn't work out with him, then I think Pierre-Paul is an option that would work out well in Baltimore, assuming the health is there, right? We have to kind of figure out what's up with the shoulder and if everything's good there. But I feel like Justin Houston, in terms of a pure pass rushing option right now, could provide a bit more value just because he's been with the organization for a year. And obviously that doesn't determine everything. But I like Jason Pierre-Paul a lot, and I think people forget his effectiveness, right? His 2021 year was not great. It was not. But before that, let's just go from 2016 to 2020. He had 7 sacks, 8.5 sacks, 12.5 sacks, 8.5 sacks, 9.5 sacks. He's still a very good player when he's healthy. Obviously, he's a bit on the older side. He'll play his age 33 season here with whatever team it is, whether it's Baltimore or another team. And you got to, again, look to the shoulder. But I think that if Pierre-Paul is the option the Ravens do decide to go with at outside linebacker, if they do indeed go with a veteran option, I think it would be a fine signing for them, especially if they can get him on a 1-year deal. He can rebuild his value with the Ravens and then be able to hit the free agent market again in 2023 and maybe secure himself one more decently sized contract. But the Ravens, I still think, do need a veteran at that position, and I've said that for the past couple of months here. So Houston, Pierre-Paul, they definitely have options, and I think I would like both of those guys, definitely, whether it is one, whether it is both. I think the Ravens do have options for sure. What into our final break here, though, on Locked On Ravens. Still a ton to talk about. When we get back, we'll be diving into a bit of minicamp, I guess, preview here for the Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your sports betting stats and info. And you can find all the latest sports developments on betonline.net, news and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup. You got the hockey conference finals, which are now over, and you got the Stanley Cup finals here, Major League Baseball, and of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline.net is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. That's the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day and tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube in video form and like this video. Be sure to follow us in audio form as well. And also be sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL, where I was over there hosting the Monday show yet again. So if you want to check me out over there, hear me talk for a little bit more. We talk about extensions for a couple of big name players. So be sure to check that out. But yes, mandatory minicamp this week. We're looking at, again, June 14 to June 16 for the Ravens. It's exciting. I mean, again, we're hitting those milestones, right? Rookie minicamp, OTAs. Now we're at mandatory minicamp. And I know there are some storylines people will be watching for. I know the big one. The big one is Lamar Jackson. Will he show up? I think he's going to show up. That's my personal opinion. And I know there's been a lot made of his voluntary OTA absence. He was working hard during that absence. And so I am personally not concerned if he does not show up, though. Then you're starting to wonder, all right, what's going on? Again, you don't really know, but what's going on? But I do think he will show up. And the other guys also, it wasn't just Lamar Jackson. He got the most attention, but it wasn't just Lamar Jackson. He didn't show up. So will the other guys show up? What's going on with Derek Wolfe, right? I think there could be some form of an answer, some hint that could be dropped depending on whether he shows up or not. So but we'll figure that out, it feels like. And then just positional battles. I know we talked a bit about positional battles a couple of weeks ago and players to watch as well. I'm very excited for a couple guys. I mean, Tyler Beatty, Justice Hill, that running back positional battle. You look at wide receiver with guys like James Prochet, Tylen Wallace, the undrafted guys, right? Shamar Bridges and Mekhi Polk and those players. Tight ends, how do the rookies look? Offensive line, there's some competition, the left guard competition. You're looking at Tyree Phillips and Ben Powers and Ben Cleveland and Patrick McCary there as well. So that's interesting. Tyler Linderbaum we talked about as well. Then on the defensive side of the ball, defensive line rotations, right? Justin Madubuike and Travis Jones and Broderick Washington. Outside linebacker, how does Jalen Ferguson look? Dalen Hayes, how does he look? And then also in the secondary, a lot of depth there for sure. So, again, the rookie cornerbacks, Kyle Fuller, how does he look? That's an exciting addition to me. Safety position or I guess I'll say defensive back because Brandon Stevens classified as a defensive back. Where's Brandon Stevens playing? Where's Adarius Washington playing? How does Jordan Stout look? So many options here. I think it's a good thing that the Ravens have with these positional battles. Competition is great. It brings out the best in you. And the Ravens have all these players vying for roster spots. There are only 53 roster spots, right? This is a team that has a lot of depth at a lot of positions. I have said throughout the offseason how I thought they've done a good job for the most part at adding depth at a lot of different positions and making sure they have a ton of it. Now, there are a few positions where they could definitely stand to add more. We talked about that last week. Wide receiver, outside linebacker, potentially inside linebacker. Oh, I forgot about inside linebacker, Malik Harrison, how he's looking, cross-training from inside linebacker and Sam. Josh Bynes coming back. That's exciting to me. And then some of these undrafted guys too, who I think could really make an impact and even sneak onto that roster. Maybe competing with Kristen Walsh for a spot, who could take Chris Board's spot, right? There are definite options for the Ravens there as well. So in terms of depth, I really like what they have. And with minicamp, I mean, it's 3 days to start really proving yourself to coaches, especially for the young guys. It's not like these veterans are coming in here vying for a roster spot for the most part, right? There are some who sign. I mean, Mike Davis is a player who I'm excited to see. He's going to be vying for a spot on the roster, depending on if the Ravens keep 3 running backs or 4 running backs. But come cut down day, the Ravens are going to have a ton of tough decisions to make. And we've talked about potential trade candidates on this roster. We've talked about guys who could potentially be on the outside looking in, not because of talent, not because they're not good or didn't show enough, but because the Ravens can only keep so many positions. So I think this is another year where the Ravens could, again, keep 2 quarterbacks on the roster and Lamar Jackson and Tyler Huntley, and maybe try to sneak a Brett Hundley onto the practice squad or Anthony Brown onto the practice squad. The personnel right now dictates the Ravens would probably keep 4 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 4 tight ends. If I had to guess, obviously I don't know that. And I know we're not at Cut Down Nation. Nobody knows, but this is that time. I mean, if Tyler Beatty impresses, but no one else does, the Ravens keep 3 running backs. And then if a couple wide receivers impress, do they end up keeping 6? Even though, again, it feels like their personnel dictates the, hey, we're going back to bully ball type style that I feel like a lot of people might be anticipating that happens with. And then, yeah, again, defensive line. Do the Ravens decide to keep 5 guys, 6 guys, 7 guys, depending on Derek Wolfe? There are so many things here that I'm excited to see. I mean, the coaching staff and the players getting all those reps. Again, reps are very, very important. I think these are now the reps you start looking at as big ones. And I know Patrick Queen expressed excitement for minicamp, saying getting the true ones on the true ones and everything. And this is the stuff that these guys love. And I mean, Patrick Queen in particular, coming off of a year, very tough first half. I thought he had a very good second half. You know, who is Patrick Queen? Who is Patrick Queen, the linebacker? Is he this player that the Ravens thought they were getting in the first round, or does he still need more development? You know, this is a crucial time for him, for some of these other young guys as well. Rashad Bateman didn't get to go through a full off-season workout program last year because of the injury he suffered in training camp. So if he's able to stay healthy throughout that whole process, it's huge for him. These wide receivers as well, not just Bateman, but I talked about James Prochet, Tylen Wallace, Devin Duvernay as well. These are all big-time reps for these guys. And it is very important. I do believe that every rep, you know, kind of pushes you one step closer to greatness because it allows you to learn something, allows you to find something you do right, something you want to improve on. There are so many things that reps can do for a player. And it's not just football. It's life, honestly. But I think at the end of the day, the Ravens are going to find out a lot about themselves over these 3 days. I know it's only 3 days. It's not training camp or anything, but this is where it starts. You know, it starts in OTAs. It starts with rookie minicamp. You know, all these offseason workouts these guys do, everything these guys have trained for. This team has high goals. They have very high goals, and rightfully so. They're coming off a year that was not a great one, and partially because of injuries, partially because of subpar play, partially because there were a lot of contributing factors. A lot of it does come down to injury, right? But there were other factors too. So learning from that season, being able to come back stronger this year, learning from that year and saying, hey, look, you know, they know what they can do. I think that would be just top tier content, honestly, because it's a comeback story. It is. If you have all these guys healthy, I know another big storyline will be the statuses of some of these injured guys, such as J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Marcus Peters, Ronnie Stanley. You know, Nick Boyle came out, spoke to the media. He looked great. He sounded very confident in himself, and that's the kind of stuff you love to see because Boyle had a very hard road coming back from that injury. And we all know how important he is to this Ravens offense. We all know how important Ronnie Stanley is, and Marcus Peters, and J.K. Dobbins, and Gus, and all these guys. We all know how important that is. So to get those guys back, they're like free agent additions, right? Like, not really. But out of all those guys, the Ravens got very minimal production. I mean, Dobbins, Edwards, Peters didn't play the whole year. Stanley played one game and didn't really do anything effective because of the injury, and it did not look like he was 100%, obviously. Nick Boyle was in and out, and then some of the other guys, too. I mean, Lamar Jackson, we have not seen Lamar Jackson play. He hasn't played since week 14 of last year, so that last month of the year he did not play. We haven't seen him since then, on a football field with the team throwing the football. So all that's going to be super exciting to see. I'm very excited for what this Ravens team can do. And I mean, look, the Ravens have a lot of potential. We all know how good of a team they can be. This is not a team that had a good couple years with Lamar Jackson under center. Then all the injuries happen, and then they're never going to get back to what they were, right? Injuries and health plays a big factor in a lot. And we did see the Bengals and the Rams last year, where the Super Bowl representatives with the AFC and the NFC, they were two of the healthiest teams in the league in 2021. So health plays a big role in it, but also you gotta deal with the hand you were dealt, and the Ravens weren't dealt a good one, unfortunately, in 2021, but they're able to, I think, learn from that, come back from it stronger. And I think, again, it all starts in mandatory minicamp, and we'll see what ends up happening there. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more minicamp content, talking about some players to watch in depth. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.